All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning for the Local Expert Series. We have Chris and Mike with us, Chris from Array Solutions and Mike from Z Networks. And they're going to help us figure out how to make sure that our home networks are safe, are effective, and help us troubleshoot some of those basic troubleshooting techniques that we could all use in our day-to-day. Funny story, the chamber actually was without internet yesterday for the later half of the afternoon. And we definitely did some of those troubleshooting things where we unplugged the router and whatnot. So I'm very excited to see what else it is that I could have done yesterday to make it work. And excited to have our host here this morning. I also want to give a shout out to Chris, our sponsor for the Local Expert Series. He sponsored the program last year and came back again this year. So for anybody who themselves is a local expert, Sheila Hatch is in the room and will be April's Local Expert Series host. If there's anybody else who's interested in sharing what it is that they do on their day-to-day, please let us know. We're always looking for new hosts. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Chris and Mike. So let me flip the camera again. Oh, perfect. You've got it.
Great. Good morning. I'm Mike, and my colleague here is
Chris Lace. I guess we didn't discuss this part, but maybe let's just give a brief introduction for each of us, like 30 seconds.
Sure.
Why don't you go first?
Okay, yeah, sure. Mike Charbonnel from a company called The Networks. It's a new business startup in Dover. So I focus on IT networking, and really network management is my specialty. And then working that several years, probably 30-something years software development, and former IT director at Portsmouth Christian Academy here in Dover.
Nice. And I've been doing this, I've been in IT for the better half of my life, and it really has been. I first started working with my dad when I was 10 or 12, pulling network cables, and I did that up through college. I did a bit of software development work, and then I've been running this company for about 7 years now in Dover, just doing IT support for small and mid-sized businesses, just sort of doing a little bit of everything all throughout. All right, so this morning we're looking to just go through some what we consider sort of the essential security, and this applies to both home and business. Just sort of the key things that we consider most important for everybody to be doing to minimize your security risk. And in many cases, they also make your life a little bit better. And then we wanted to sort of approach troubleshooting technical problems. IT systems and computers are fairly complicated things, but the basic troubleshooting steps are sort of the same things you would do if you were troubleshooting, why your toilet isn't working, right? Like they're very different systems complexity-wise, but the basic steps involved are very much the same. So just helping you think about problem solving. And the one that we wanted to go through was Wi-Fi, because it's something that everybody sort of treats like the weather, but there are steps you can take to try to understand why your Wi-Fi is slow, why it's not working, that sort of stuff. So we'll use that as the primary metaphor for your troubleshooting.
Yeah, and it seems like all this stuff has gotten much more important when everybody went home for COVID and needed to rely on their home networks for working from home, for learning from home. I know myself as IT director got lots and lots of questions from home users, and really that was the impetus for the start of the business. Like, okay, I'm used to working in a corporate environment or a home environment or a business environment where there's professionally designed and managed networks, and I'm home now, and all of a sudden they have to be the professional. So here it goes.
Do you just want to point through that slide?
Yes.
Yeah, so this slide here is something that I like to show to clients and anyone else. Is there's often a question of, well, nobody's interested in me personally. Why does somebody, why would somebody come after me? And the answer is, unfortunately, they're not generally interested in you as a person. They're not even necessarily targeting you specifically. These days, there's, they call it the cybersecurity or malware industry, right? Like this is essentially a business for a certain group of people in the world. These products exist, and unfortunately, you are the resource which everybody is going after. And that resource is really your computer. Because your computer, once somebody has control of it, can be used for a whole bunch of purposes. Most of these we can kind of gloss over, but the core idea here is that your computer is a resource, right? So up on the left corner with web server, if somebody wants to distribute more malware, they might load it onto your computer so that it can be delivered other places. They might run a web server so that, those phishing sites that people get pulled into, they're not running that on their hardware, they're running that on your hardware to protect them from liability and just, shield themselves from problems. One of the more unpleasant ones on that list is, if you're storing materials that are illegal in your jurisdiction or just ethically questionable, again, may as well store them on somebody else's computer so you don't get in trouble. So, just your storage is useful. Then coming down through some of the other ones, financial credentials over on the other side there, that's the one that most people think about. But again, not targeting you particularly, but, you use your computer to go to the bank now, you go there to access your 401ks and whatnot. If they can get those credentials, they can then move that money out of those accounts. So your computer is often a gateway to more financial resources. And then the bottom right corner is really the most common one right now. Or actually, we'll get to the bottom right corner. They call this hostage things. Ransomware has been listed by the FBI for the last 5 years as one of their more significant threats. I believe there was an oil pipeline a couple of years ago that had problems with it. There was a major attack that hit institutions across the U.S. And that's just people. They log onto your system. You have files on your computer that you need. They encrypt those files and then ransomware, ransom back the keys to the kingdom so that you get access to that data. And then the last one that's been coming up fairly often is that reputation hijacking, lower left-hand corner. I just recently started getting phone calls from Google, and the most common thing right now is people get their Instagram accounts hacked, and then somebody tries to ransom that back, and if you don't ransom it back, they publish unpleasant things and/or delete your account. And so taking steps to prevent that from happening beforehand is really critical, because once you're in that mess, once somebody's ransomed your data or ransomed your Instagram account, unfortunately, you're sort of on the back foot. You're kind of behind the 8 ball already. But the main takeaway from this slide is that your computer is a valuable resource, and there are a lot of things that people would like to do, most of which have nothing to do with you as a person. They're just looking for open systems.
Okay, so really we talked about one of the first defenses and something really that everybody can do. You don't need to be an IT professional, and you probably hear about this a lot, about good passwords. We talk about password hygiene. Everybody cleans up and does appropriate hygiene every day, and it's really important to do password hygiene not only once but regularly. And so here's the classic one that all IT folks hate to see on the far right here. So password written on a piece of paper and just posted near the computer just so they can remember it. Not a great idea. So several recommendations here is first, use good passwords, and then also use password managers. So Chris, why don't you talk about the strength of different password managers?
Yeah, so the idea behind a password manager is passwords are hard to remember. On a lot of ways, they're kind of a bad security solution. We're asking you, a human being, to remember a bunch of complicated letters and numbers that just aren't really going to stick in your head. So your instinct is to pick things that are easy to remember, but unfortunately, things that are easy to remember are, on average, easier to guess. So to get around that problem, these tools exist where you remember one specific big complicated password, and then that password manager manages passwords for all your different accounts. So for example, I happen to use Bitwarden. The 3 listed there are all ones that I've used. I actually rotate my password manager every year just to make sure that I kind of know what's out there, and I consider them all interchangeable in the sense that they all work really well, they do their job, and they are highly secure. But what they do is you remember a single password, and then that password manager, that bit of software, autofills passwords for your various sites. So, I mean, I think last time I checked, my Bitwarden has 300 or 400 passwords. That's just my personal passwords. That's not even including all the passwords that I maintain for clients. And it's one of those rare cases where the password manager makes your life both more secure and more convenient because of that autofilling feature. And that means that every single account I use has a different password. Those passwords are all 10 to 20 characters, which makes them very hard to crack, very hard to guess, and frankly just minimizes the complexity in my life. As a matter of fact, a fairly common thing I come across is I'll go, oh, this is a cool new service. Let me try it out. And I'll get there and my password manager will be like, hey, do you want me to sign in to that site for you? Because you've definitely already been here like 3 years ago.
So here's the next part, social engineering. So what the malware industry is trying to do is get information about you so that you end up giving them some key credentials. And it might not sound like much, and it comes in very many different sources. Email is probably the most frequent one. You get a spam email, says you've won Amazon gift card for $100. Click here to claim it. Good idea, don't click there, right? So email is probably the most common, but it's not the only one. I'm getting a lot more by text. Really, in the last year, I've gotten so many by text, but there's also phone. So it's called vishing. Instead of phishing, it's vishing. So voicemail or voice phishing. So in my role as IT director at Portsmouth Christian, I get these calls from really shady sounding folks who wanted to sell me some service, and they asked for lots of information about our business. And I realized this is really a vishing attack. And the more information they can collect from me, especially as IT director, they would see I would have advanced credentials, and if they could somehow compromise them, then they could really own the kingdom. But they come through lots of different things, and the key to all of them is they try to get you to do something which is not in your best interest. And so giving them some piece of information, like a lot of it is publicly available, or there's an awful lot of publicly available information about you, but there's a lot that isn't. And what the malware industry is doing, they're building these huge databases, trying to piece together a virtual you so that they have enough information to sort of falsely represent you.
Yeah, the key rule with social engineering is if somebody's asking you to do something right now, it's almost always not in your best interests. Even a couple of years ago, my mom got hit by this because somebody called her up and said, we're going to disconnect your power, and it just it was one thing after another that day, and she just sort of went ahead and paid what she thought she needed to pay to keep the power on, without really thinking through and realizing, wait a second, this is the first time I'm hearing about it. There are rules about this. There are laws. They can't just disconnect your power without going through a series of steps. It's very, very rare that there is a situation where you must do something right now. And if there is a situation where you're worried that it might be a right now sort of thing, the rule of thumb is if somebody calls and says, you need to do this, say, hold on for a second, I'm going to give you a call back. And what you do is, if they say they're from the power company or from Chase Bank, look up Chase Bank's or the power company's public phone number and go ahead and call that. It's much, much harder to make Google show you the wrong information than it is to call you and make your phone show you a bit of information. Caller ID is unfortunately still not valid.
I know that particular situation has happened to at least one person on this call today, because
like I said,
the same exact thing. Eversource is disconnecting your power, and so
It's urgent. You're like, oh no, that's bad. I have to act now.
Well, and as a rule of thumb in my life, I find that anytime you say like, oh, there's no way I would fall prey to that, or there's no way that would happen, but it's just, the goal is not for it to hit your rational part of your brain. It's hitting you at just that bad time. So for my parents, it was at a time when they were getting lots of calls, they were in financial troubles. And so it was just, they said no to 99% of them, but then eventually somebody came through and they were particularly tired, particularly vulnerable. And it's a pretty shitty industry because of that, but they're just looking to hit you when you're at your low points.
So how to protect against it? So this is one method. So multi-factor authentication, and there really are lots of different ways to do this. Let's see, everybody's familiar with single factor, which would be a password or a PIN. But when you add multiple, you get like face print, biometrics, eyeballs, voice ID. I know my bank does voice ID, all kinds of things like that, tokens and hardware. So all of those things add to the complexity, and it make it more difficult for a hacker who has some piece of information. So let's say they've got a voice print, but they don't have your token, or they don't know your password, things like that, right? Because that's the thing, these phishing phone calls, they get you on the phone long enough, they can record your voice and say, okay, we've got enough of a voice sample of this guy, we could probably mimic his voice. But if you put all these together, in fact, you want to talk about pulling them all together?
Yeah, so in general, the best possible option is, and so the key ideas with multi-factor is it's actually, if we're going to pick one thing off this list that everybody should do, is make sure that they have multi-factor authentication enabled across all their accounts. As I noted earlier, I've gotten calls from people who have said they've lost their Instagrams or whatever. In every one of those cases, it's somebody figures out your password. But if you have some sort of two-factor authentication enabled, it doesn't really matter if they know your password because you'll get a text on your phone. If we look at the second section, a text message on your phone is the most common second factor of authentication. It's not the best, but it is something and it works pretty well. The only reason it's considered not the best is there are ways to sort of to go after your phone number and sort of force it to redirect. So something that would be better is either an application on your phone. So Authy, Google Auth, even Bitwarden provides it. It's that thing where, they say, hey, can you, pull this app up on your phone and type that number that's being shown there. That one works really, really well. And then the final one is what they call a hardware token. It's literally a physical thing that has to be plugged in. So for example, I keep one of these in my wallet. In order to access most of my accounts, I have to plug this into the computer that's signing in. So even if you knew my passwords or were able to hijack my phone, you still couldn't really get into my accounts without physically plugging this in. Now, that's kind of really overkill for most people, but sitting somewhere in the middle, either going for the text authentication or the app on your phone, really provides you a huge amount of security.
Do you want to bring that?
So here's something, one of my favorite topics, it's called patching for beginners. So systems and software all have bugs. I wrote software for 35 years, and guess what? I didn't write bug-free software. It always had bugs, and it's become more important, especially as this malware industry is getting really good at detecting flaws and vulnerabilities. So this becomes really important for everybody. So all systems need regular patching and maintenance. You probably know on your cell phone or tablet, let's say when I wake up in the morning, I can see my tablet, 22 applications were updated overnight. So that kind of stuff happens all the time on phones, tablets, PCs, Macs, everything. So that's really become an essential part of running safe systems. So this is what happens if you don't keep things up to date. But so the software fixes really fix two major categories. It's security issues that have become aware of basically it's a programming or systems error that causes a security problem. In other words, lets somebody in for unauthorized access. Or the second one is a vulnerability, which is just similar. It's an opening, probably unintentional, that lets somebody exploit the system against the system's owners and wishes. So if you did only two things, check the operating system patches, and we'll go through the details on that, and then check the browser patches. So I'm assuming the browser is probably the application folks use absolutely the most. Most of the time you're in Chrome, Google, Firefox, Safari, all of those browsers. You want to make sure those are up to date. So to give you a sense of how frequently those browsers offer patches, in my work at Portsmouth Christian, we would probably get 2 to 4 Chrome updates per week. So that stuff would have to be constantly pushed out to machines and verified. And some of these are really critical. They're actually there fixing a 0-day vulnerability, which means there is a vulnerability that's essentially propagating on the internet for which there's currently no protection. So these are really important fixes. So let's talk about Windows updates. So first thing is you want to be able to check to make sure your system is up to date. So here's a screen. If you look for, and we'll show you how to get here, Windows updates. And a couple of things you want to look for here are the verification that your system is up to date. So your system, if you leave it on, checks at least once a day. It's actually more often than that, checks pretty frequently. And you want to make sure you see this on your screen. So you want to go there and say, okay, are we up to date? Yes. And if it says last checked in, and it's a time that's, a week, 2, 3, or even longer ago, then there's an issue. And that's the kind of thing typically that Chris and I get involved in, finding out why updates are not working. Anything on that?
Yeah, and then the final thing that always worth checking is the optional updates. Now, optional updates are generally not a security problem, but they're usually driver updates. They'll help the system run as well as it possibly can. The only exception for updates that you can skip is sometimes Windows does, they'll call them feature updates, or, like right now there's a big push to update to Windows 11. Right now, you're not really required to do that. Windows 10 has support through about 2025, 2026. Odds are they'll probably extend that out. So for most of my clients, I'm telling them you can update to 11 if you'd like. But it's totally fine to wait on feature updates, but it's not okay to wait on security updates, unfortunately.
Yeah, and true story. Recently was at a couple's house, and the problem they reported was our email's been hacked, and sure enough, it had. Then I started looking at their computer. Updates had been failing for over 3 years. So they hadn't had a security update for 3 years. So it probably wasn't a huge surprise that the email got hacked, and probably that wasn't the only thing. So they really were in a bad situation. So next one is, let's talk about browser updates, getting the really probably the most important application for most people. So if you're using Chrome, you want to go to the screen, you go to settings, help about, and the thing you want to look for is Chrome is up to date. So again, the browsers are supposed to do this, as the operating systems are supposed to do this. And the great thing is it works, let's say 95 to 99% of the time. It works and you don't have to worry. The problem is, even if 1% of the systems that fail, that's still a huge number of machines, and you don't want to be in the 1%. So you want to make sure your browser is updating consistently. Same thing if you use Microsoft Edge, settings, help about, you want to verify, do that and verify that your browser is up to date. And pretty much all the browsers have a way to check if they are up to date.
So how often would you say they should go through these steps?
I would say probably once a week is okay, and that might even be on the high side. But, like I said, our experience with Chrome updates were coming 2 to 4 times a week at times. So if they do once a week, once every 2 weeks, the thing is, it's a risk analysis. The longer you go, the more things you are likely to encounter. So if you are patched, the last time you patched was a month ago, kind of all the new malware that came out that month, you are not well protected against. Kind of a related thing is, like antivirus updates. So, a machine which should be running antivirus. Most vendors put out antivirus updates, signature updates about once a day is kind of typical for good reputable vendors.
Yeah, so just sort of a review of what we went over, sort of in order of both convenience and important. Use a password manager. Those are honestly a real pain to set up sometimes. The initial first part of it is you have to load a bunch of information in. But once you get on a roll, the chamber has just started using them. There are a lot of advantages to having access to your passwords sort of wherever you are, wherever your devices are, and also not having to keep track of them anymore. Next on that list is enabling some sort of two-factor authentication. At the most basic level, getting a text whenever somebody signs into an account is absolutely essential, and you should enable it in as many places as you can. And then the last on the list is, hit patches and don't forget to reboot your computer. As a matter of fact, I was glancing over at the screen. I think that might have been what happened to our computer here.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Okay.
We're working on it. So the next thing, it's funny, the next thing talks about don't share your systems. That sounds very unfriendly, but we've got some great stories of people who shared computers, like moms and dads and teachers and kids. And while I was working at PCA, moms, I get a sort of a ticket from the mom says, I've lost all my email. I can't read any of my email. Same day, why is it that my son is reading all my OneDrive files, who's a student in her class? I'm like, okay, well, that's not good. Are you guys sharing a computer? Yeah. So it really was an issue where they weren't logging off and clearing it correctly. So sharing computers and devices has some liabilities if you're not really careful about what you're doing.
Yeah, on the same front, I've had business clients who have come to me with problems and said, my computer suddenly is having an issue, or something's running slow, and I come in and find their kids have installed games on there, and in many cases the kids are fine. They don't install any games they're not supposed to, but you go to install Roblox. Roblox was very popular for a couple of years. There were, the first search results when you search Roblox downloads were 3 of them were all malware, or at least they're not the real Roblox. And so
to be blunt, clients have spent a lot of money with me to solve problems that it just would have been cheaper to buy their kids a computer.
Well, let's talk about actually of this presentation. This might be my favorite topic about reliable Wi-Fi, because it's actually the one that I've spent the most time with clients on, in the sense of people have, business, organizations, churches, homes, getting Wi-Fi to work reliably. And there's always these fun revelations that go with it. And one of the things about Wi-Fi is you really have to know where your access points are. They're usually on the ceiling. Sometimes they're buried under the ceiling, but knowing where your access points are is a really key part. So Wi-Fi is really about location, location, location. You think like, Wi-Fi is fairly mature technology. What could possibly go wrong? Well, it turns out there really are quite a few things that can and do go wrong. Location is one of them. Interference, incompatibility, and just plain overload are some things. So let's talk about location. So when we think about location, you want to know, what is your distance to the access point? Again, if you have to kind of know where they are. And this becomes even more critical as we think of the newer generations of Wi-Fi, because what happens is these higher frequencies have a more difficult time penetrating walls and bricks and all kinds of other media. So, let's say if we were 15 years ago and Wi-Fi used a 2.4 gigahertz band, that tended to travel pretty well through walls. Especially as you get to 6 gigahertz, the range is much less. And I think that's something where it becomes all the more important that you are close to the access point with minimal number of obstructions. So this is the obstructions is really the important piece there. You can say, okay, well, I'm only, let's say I'm only 15 to 20 feet from the access point, but what's between you and the access point? Things like metal structures, HVAC ducts, that's been a huge issue in places that I've been, all metal ducts, big things, metal mesh in walls and floors, real important. One of the things, I was in a couple places where metal mesh was unexpected. I was measuring Wi-Fi signal strength at a customer's house, great in the living room, great in the next room, went to the next room right next to it, and it was not only not good, it was non-existent. So I pointed to the wall, and it was an older house, probably, maybe 140 years old. I said, any idea what is in this wall? And they said, well, they didn't know. I ended up talking to a plumber friend of mine who said, houses of that era oftentimes put metal mesh in the walls before they put the plaster on, so that the plaster would adhere to the metal mesh. Well, if you're trying to transmit Wi-Fi through those metal mesh walls, it's not so good. Brick, stone, concrete, also serious attenuators for Wi-Fi signal. Even dense trees, if you had really robust plants in your house, those can have an impact. This one's probably one of my favorite ones here. Large fish tank. So let's have this beautiful fish tank in your house, and you're trying to, let's say, and you're on the wrong side of this fish tank. That could cause some serious Wi-Fi problems for you. So, and Wi-Fi problems exist. They'll probably manifest as signal dropouts, really slow performance, inconsistent results. You refresh a page, it works. You refresh again, it doesn't work. Chris, any stories for you on location and impedances to Wi-Fi?
One of my favorite ones is I have some clients out in Algonquin, and many of those buildings are quite old. And normally we think of wood as a relatively permeable material. Wood is not great, but in general, modern wood construction, I find that Wi-Fi signals go through it pretty well. But there was a building out there that was built, I think, at least 100 years ago, and whatever the grain of the wood, or really I think it's the density of the sap in the wood at that particular time, the sheathing for the building, the actual the outer layers, the interlocking wooden boards. If I so much as stepped around the corner, so like I had line of sight to an access point in a window, and if I brought my phone around the corner, I would lose all signal. Whatever that building was made out of, that wood might as well have been sheets of metal. And it just happened to be that whatever year that tree was cut down, just had a particular density that was different than other wood. And so even something felt like it should have been fine acted like a Faraday cage.
Yeah, so and this is the kind of thing that, we do as professionals, we can go in your organization, your home and detect. But part of the thing for this is there are things you can do yourself too. So you can actually, most phones and devices have an app that you can use and that'll measure Wi-Fi signal strength. So you can go to key places around your house. Like obviously, if you stand right next to your access point, it's going to be great. It should be great. But you can look at your signal level as you go from room to room to room, and more often than not, you'll find there'll be some rooms of your house where the signal strength is significantly down. So one of the remediations is, okay, you want to move either you or the access point closer together with minimal obstructions. So we're probably not too far. I know we are in the educational environment and industry. The goal for education is an access point in every single classroom, and that's really the gold standard. So every classroom gets an access point that's dedicated to that classroom and the 15 to 20 students in that classroom. In the home, you may not be able to put an access point or repeater in every room, but you could certainly install additional access points in key locations. Big houses, you could probably do 2 access points. If you have multiple floors, you could probably think of other ones. Chris, any other solutions on this one?
As a general rule of thumb, most people just have, Comcast or whatever installs a box, and they put it in almost always a stairwell or a closet or somewhere. But really the best place for that initial access point is somewhere out in the open on a table in your living room. I know some of them are ugly, but that it gives them the best line of sight. Thankfully, some of them are getting a little less ugly, and we'll even have like replaceable sleeves you can put on them so they can color match things. But almost, I'd say on average, most people's houses are probably large enough that they'll need at least 2 access points. It's very rare to find a place where you can put 1 access point in, and even in the, your upstairs guest bedroom, you can still get a decent signal.
So here's an example of 2 apps that you can download for your phone. And so you download and install these, they're free. There's professional versions of them as well. And I probably have the professional version of one of them. But these are free. And what you can do, you launch them and you can just go around your house and you will get signal strength. So you'll see all the access points. The most interesting thing too is you also see all your neighbors. So you get a sense of interference, like, okay, sometimes some of the older equipment, what would happen is you take it out of the box, you install it, and it comes up on, let's say, channel 6, and that's great. Well, so the neighbor gets the same model. This comes out of the box, installs on channel 6. So pretty much you're all on channel 6. Not a good thing. Newer access points in technology are supposed to be smart and do like radio frequency surveys to find out, okay, where's all the traffic, where are the channels, and choose a reasonable. And most of the time they would, not always. I've seen times where I was at one church where it made a bad decision. It chose a channel that was already heavily used, and in lieu of one that they could have chosen. So I think it's always good to verify that your equipment is working optimally.
I have a quick question about that.
Sure.
So how do you find that channel that you're on? Is it through this app that you
Yes,
download?
Yeah, the app will show you essentially everything that it hears, and then what it's going to do is for those you can see, okay, that's mine, and then you can see these are my neighbors. So let me just, I'll show you because you're in the room here.
Yeah, because my husband and I, we typically use like the internet speed. We'll go to Google and do the internet speed to see how fast that is to see the signal strength. So I didn't realize we could do a different channel.
You can, yeah. So here's your environment here at the chamber. I know folks can't see this at home, but so you'll see this is a downtown environment, really crowded. I probably see 25 or 30 things listed, and there are a lot of channels that are heavily used. So that's one way to do it.
And you'll be able to tell which channel you're on?
Yeah, because it gives your name. Like this one, let me see. I should see chamber. 5 gigahertz here. Oh yeah, there we go. Chamber staff, and I see chamber guests. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's actually labeled on the app.
Yeah, again, you can't see at home, but when he switched to 5 gigahertz, the number of networks dropped off pretty aggressively because the 5 gigahertz signal for this building is likely to stay pretty much in this room and a little bit, the windows, it'll go up to the windows. But even the trees outside will slow down a 5G signal pretty heavily, whereas 2.4 tends to spread pretty far. So you'll tend to see a lot more traffic on the 2.4 networks.
So yeah, installing additional access points. Again, certainly home users can do it. I mean, Chris and I do this professionally and almost on a daily basis. And it really becomes an easy solution to getting better connectivity. And I guess part of the reason is our belief. I know both of us are in this situation where, you know, connectivity is essential. You know, it used to be that people would use the home internet. Okay, so and if it went down for a little bit, okay, they missed some Netflix. Okay, that's what. But now they're doing their core business from home. They're doing their core education from home. Hopefully less of that from home, but nonetheless, it's, you know, when COVID started, I made the comment to my wife, who's a teacher. I said, this transition to the home is likely to continue post-COVID. You know, just my personal belief that, you know, even though school will continue to move towards on-prem in person, there's going to be a remote component still. So interference. So we talked about the kinds of things that can happen. So the neighbors, the kids, the myriads of devices. So that's one of the things you can learn from this app. You can see all the neighbors' access point. Now there's no secure information other than you will see they have an access point that's broadcasting, and you may see the broadcast name of their network name, their SID. So that's where the neighbors come in. You never know. The kids might be doing something, especially if you have tech-savvy kids. They're likely to do really creative things in their rooms. They may be running hotspots and access points of their own. They may be, you know, doing some things that kind of mess up your home internet. So it helps to know what's going on and just the numbers of devices transmitting. Things like printers, for example, for interference. This is the big one in the educational environment. So a lot of printers come with, you pick it up, turn it on, plug it in. Even if you plug it into Ethernet, the Wi-Fi is still on and transmitting. There was a huge number of devices on our campus that was the case. So we had to go around and specifically turn off Wi-Fi on a large number of printers because they were interfering with the campus Wi-Fi network. So really the solutions here is know what's around you. And again, we go back to the app there to say, okay, look at what the RFs, the radio frequency situation is around your house, all the networks, install the Wi-Fi analyzer for your smartphone, and pick channels that are less crowded. Pretty much all devices, whether you have a modem from Comcast or you've purchased your own Wi-Fi and routers, you can usually pick the channels that are less crowded. Yeah. Anything there?
No, I don't know what the next slide is. I think we're pretty close. Oh, okay, go ahead.
Okay, so
your wheelhouse of mine.
Okay, yeah, so incompatibility. So really some of the older and less powerful devices would use the 2.4 gigahertz frequency band. And that's right now, so if you were to look at newer devices, the newest devices will probably support 3 frequency bands, 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, and the newest called 6 gigahertz, which is ultra high bandwidth, high frequency, but really low range. So make sure your home office supports this band. So because a lot of the older devices support this band, and some of the what we call Internet of Things devices, like the little, you know, internet-enabled plugs and switches and doorbells and things like that, those often, and thermostats are on this band. So newer devices have a strong preference for the 5 gigahertz band, mostly because it generally has better bandwidth. So if my phone, and pretty much anybody brings their smartphone into an environment that has both of these bands, it will generally pick the 5 gigahertz band. Here's the deal though, it will pick it even if it's not awesome in signal. Like every vendor typically has their own algorithm for how they pick channels. So sometimes it will pick the higher frequency band for potential stronger, for better bandwidth, but it may not be as reliable as a signal. So you want to make sure your home and office support at least these 2 bands. So summary, there's really a lot of things that you and your business can do to keep yourself secure and operational. So, we review things like multi-factor authentication, good password hygiene, regular updates and patches. And the operational side is pretty much, it's a Wi-Fi enabled world. So you want to make sure your Wi-Fi is strong and persistent throughout your environment. And really one thing we didn't talk about, I know Chris and I both share this, for really mission critical stuff, we often put it on Ethernet anyways. So Ethernet is the hardwired connection that you would plug into your computer and typically to a router or to a switch. That certainly gives the best network performance and reliability.
Yeah, and Ethernet's really an important thing to have around. I know sometimes people don't, a lot of laptops don't have Ethernet ports anymore. I know mine doesn't, so I carry around a little dongle in a bag that I can plug in. But the reason for that is, coming back to the idea of troubleshooting, if your Wi-Fi is not working or if your internet is slow, the best thing to do is to start from the source. Go plug right into the router that, the box the cable company provides you and test it there, right? Because if you're getting good signal, if you're getting good speeds and good connection there, then you can sort of work outwards from there and see what the problem is, right? And it's always better to start from the source because, you're all the way down here at the end of the chain. Working your way up to the system, it might be a problem all the way at the top. It could be, maybe your internet is down. That does happen. So it's always good to confirm that your internet's up and then work your way backwards, step by step, making sure that each step along the way makes sense. So for example, if you're checking a Wi-Fi network, go stand right next to the router and test your speed. Then move one room away, then another room away, and keep working your way out towards wherever your problem spot is. And that applies to pretty much any troubleshooting. Right? Like you always start from the source.
Doesn't look like we have any more questions virtually.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak for Mike, but I think I'm happy to answer follow-up questions. I'm sure our contact information will be published places. And if you have, my philosophy is always advice is generally free, right? Like if you would like advice on how to build your network, that's something you're going to have to pay me for. But if you just want to question, I'm always happy to answer questions. I think it makes us all better off when we share knowledge.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for participating today, both in person and virtually. Thank you to Mike and Chris for giving us all of this incredible information. And thank you to Aurea Solutions for continuing to sponsor Local Expert Series. So thank you everyone, and I hope you all have a great day.
Enjoy your happy Wednesday, whatever day we do this.